Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here in Mumbai finally this evening. It's been a long time to get here. You'd think Singapore would be pretty easy. A big part of my job is doing just this, traveling around the region to the various countries, getting a chance to meet a lot of different customers. And part of the excitement of that job is you never exactly know what's going to be important to a given customer. Some customers want to talk about some of the new emerging trends, things like cloud or the consumerization of IT. Some customers want to talk about more operational day-to-day challenges. How do I provision and get better efficiency out of my compute infrastructure? Or how do I migrate some of my legacy applications? But one of the common themes that comes through with almost every customer I talk to is just the ongoing challenges in terms of managing their storage infrastructure. And a lot of people tell me that managing that ongoing deluge of data kind of feels a bit like trying to take a drink from one of these. You certainly can do that. You can put your face up to that and you'll probably get some water, but probably not a real pleasant experience. And that's kind of what managing storage is like. Getting the job done today, but it's not really a very pleasant experience. And so for the next, 25 or 30 minutes, I'm going to talk about kind of two things. One, talk a little bit about some of the new emerging trends and some things around, all this big buzz and hype around big data. So that's a little bit more on kind of a longer-term direction and kind of where we see the market going. And then I'll spend the second half of the presentation and talk a little bit more about some strategies and approaches and technologies that help manage more of your day-to-day operational challenges that you're seeing in storage. So I guess first of all, how many of you have read an article in the last month or so that talked about big data? All right. Now, how many of you are actually implementing something that you would consider big data? Yeah, that's pretty common. We've done this now in Tokyo and Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, and we're seeing a lot of hype and a lot of discussion around big data, but still the adoption of big data is fairly limited, and there's also a lot of confusion, right? I think the vendors are making the confusion even worse by labeling existing solutions now as all of a sudden they're kind of big data solutions. It's a lot what you saw with cloud 2 or 3 years ago. Solutions that already existed as kind of standard solutions all of a sudden became cloud solutions. So what we're going to try to do here is kind of get a little clarity on what big data is, what it's not, and maybe some different approaches as you start to consider the possibility of implementing big data solutions. So first of all, let's talk about what big data is. There's kind of 4 key attributes when we think about big data. One is they're very large data sets. They're not your typical, small databases. These can be, hundreds and hundreds of megabytes, terabytes in data set sizes. 2, there are typically various data types in there. It's not like a traditional RDBMS with very structured data. There can be MPEGs, there can be JPEGs, there's a lot of unstructured data. There might also be structured data. 3 is it's very fast-moving data. So the window by which I can operate on it is fairly narrow. And the last attribute is I need to make decisions fairly quickly about that. If I can tell you in 3 months that a merchandising decision would have had an impact, you've missed your whole window to have impacted the outcome you wanted to. So that time frame in which to make a decision becomes very important. So let me give you a very real example. There was an article in the New York Times just recently about the American retailer Target. One of the things Target was doing was they were taking a look at women that had come into the store that would buy cocoa butter, that might buy a very large handbag that could be big enough to carry diapers and things like that in, and maybe they were buying folic acid and extra vitamins. Well, knowing some of the things that pregnant women would stock up on that you might not otherwise stock up on, Target was able to determine that people that bought a certain series of items, like I just mentioned, actually had a greater propensity to be pregnant, and that by sending them targeted mailers for coupons on diapers or coupons on pacifiers, they were able to increase the cross-selling opportunity. That's a concept and a relation that a year or 2 years ago you wouldn't have ever been able to make. But the ability to make those type of relations and the ability to process that kind of data doesn't lend itself well to traditional BI. And that's why they turn to big data to try to solve that problem. As you look at big data, though, a lot of companies are, first of all, somewhat intimidated by it, and then second of all, not clear how do I get there? And so from a Dell standpoint, we think of that big data maturity model kind of taking 5 stages. Stage number 1 kind of starts where Target was 3 or 4 years ago, right? I'm not tracking data. I don't know exactly who's buying what. I can't have, I don't get any value of that, and I really don't have any action. I don't really have even, I certainly don't have information. I probably don't even have data. I just have a bunch of bits on a drive somewhere. As you move to stage 2, Target started to retain that data. And so what you see are things like your frequent flyer card, your loyalty card, your Target shopper card. And there's a big reason that companies want that information from you. They can track exactly your psychographics, exactly what you buy, what motivates you to buy, and then sell you more stuff as a result of it. So Target started a loyalty program and started retaining data on what people were buying. This was still a very reactive type of an approach, but at least they had a data repository. Then as you move forward, you start to optimize that infrastructure. How do I have storage that's better suited to these different types of data sets? How do I have the ability to analyze that and start to derive value? How do I decide who has control or access to that information? And then as they move forward, they started to do simple analytics, right? Some of the examples I was giving you in terms of being able to do targeted mailers to particular customers that bought certain things, and now they started to get proactive. And so I went from bits to data to information, so now Target had true knowledge. And then eventually, as they continue to go forward, complex analytics, right? How can I then correlate that to the possibility that somebody's actually going to buy coffee in one of the Starbucks in this store? And how do I cross-sell offer them coupons at the checkout, when they actually check out, for other things that I might want them to buy between checkout and the exit from the store? And so I'm really using this as a strategic tool in my decision-making process. But one of the important points to note is, as you go through that maturity, you don't need to wait to get to stage 5 to receive value. The green line on the top is kind of the valued gain, and the 2 lines on the bottom are the value lost, or the opportunity lost, as a result of not having this type of analytics and this type of insight. And as you can see, as I get into even the reactive mode, I start to get value from that information that I've been retaining and starting to act on. Now, certainly as you get into that final 5th stage of strategic, the green bar is the highest and the other bars are now neutral, so that's where you get the optimal benefit. But you can start realizing benefits much earlier in that stage. But the problem becomes, or gets further compounded, that now I'm storing even more data than I was before. So now if I've got millions of shoppers, I'll give you another interesting statistic. Walmart processes 1 million transactions an hour. So if I've got 1 million transactions I'm processing on an hour over hundreds of thousands of different consumers, and I want to analyze that, you can start to imagine how big that data set's going to get. So the question becomes, not just how do I store this, but how do I store it much more efficiently? And so Dell's approach to this has really been predominantly focused so far around, can you grab some water for me, please? Has been really focused around more of an open source, excuse me. Thanks. Excuse me. Much more around an open source type of an approach. For Dell's 20-year history, we've been very committed to open solutions, and we really like the open source approach to this because we think it yields a lot more value and a lot more cost-effective solution. So a lot of Dell solutions have been focused around what's called Hadoop. Excuse me. Around Hadoop, which is a big data engine. It's an Apache-based solution. And what we like about it, obviously, is that it's free. One of the challenges with open source, though, is the support and service around them. So we've also partnered with a company called Cloudera. So you can think of Cloudera for Hadoop the same way that Red Hat is to Linux. Offers more of an overall solution and the support and maintenance around it. On the big data retention side, we've partnered with a company called Rainstore. The thing we like really about Rainstore is the compression capabilities. Rainstore has the ability, A, it runs natively on Hadoop, but B, you can get up to a 98% reduction in your data footprint. So if you think about that, for every 100 megabytes I'm storing of raw data, physically I'm only storing 2 megabytes. So significant compression of the amount of data that I actually need to store. So as we kind of transition off of big data and some of the things of the future, let's spend a few minutes and talk a little bit about kind of some of the realities that most people are facing today and the challenges of data storage in most organizations that we're seeing today. So if we think about kind of common themes, common pain points that we hear, there's really kind of 6 big areas that we consistently hear. One is the whole data growth is out of control. I've got wasted capacity, just like Aman was talking about. I might have some storage here, and it might be 20% utilized. I might have storage there that's 40% utilized. I might have storage that's 60% utilized. But overall, it's growing quickly, and I end up with these islands of data that aren't efficiently used. Another big challenge is a lot of the data is actually inactive. So 80% of data in most enterprises is inactive. Think about emails that are over 30 days old. The likelihood that you will touch an email decays asymptotically with time. So the longer it's been, the lower the likelihood and the more quickly it approaches zero that you'll actually go access that data. So why store that on expensive, high-performance fiber channel drives? Systems are very complex and inflexible to manage. Think about the armies of people you have that manage your fiber channel infrastructure, that have specialized skill sets to be able to manage and provision and deploy and keep your storage running. Data recovery is difficult and slow. One of the statistics I like to quote is that, on average, 20% of backups actually fail. So if you think about that, that's 1 out of 5. It basically says one day of the week, if that happens to be the day you need the data, may not be there. Replication, very costly and also unreliable. You end up having a complete duplicate of all of your expensive storage infrastructure at a second site. All the associated costs, all the associated management, all of the associated OpEx. And then the last piece, and this seems to be particularly unique to the storage industry, is this whole concept of forklift upgrades. Seems to be this kind of tendency over the last 3 or 4 years that every generation, every 3 or 4 years, the storage vendors bring out a new generation of storage, and they tell you to throw away everything you had bought before and replace it with this new stuff, and then, oh, by the way, rebuy all the software licenses you had previously purchased, all of your replication, all of your snapshot, all of your cloning. And so from Dell's perspective, we don't think that's the right way to go. We think that the right storage architecture is fluid. And by fluid, what we mean is several things. First of all, you should never have to do a forklift upgrade again. Second of all, the infrastructure should be smart enough to adapt to your changes and to your needs. You shouldn't have to know what type of data should be stored on tape, what type of data should be stored on disk, what type should be stored on tier 1. The infrastructure should be smart enough to manage that for you. And finally, really it enables you to shift your IT expense from that day-to-day kind of operation to more and more towards innovation. And so if I give you an example of what fluid data can do for you, we really think of it in terms of 3 primary areas. 1, maximize efficiency. The opportunity through virtualization, through thin provisioning, and just a kind of base level on thin provisioning. Thin provisioning, if you think about it in its simplistic terms, is the ability to kind of oversubscribe your storage. So most people today, if I've got applications that need 1 terabyte of storage each and I've got 5 of them, I don't want to go in there and reprovision storage 2 months later. So I'll just give each application 3 terabytes now. Not the most efficient, but at least I don't have to keep manually adding more storage. So I've got 5 by 3 each, that's 15 terabytes of storage, but I only need 5 terabytes right now. With thin provisioning, what you can do is the application thinks they have access to 3 terabytes, but I've only physically provisioned 1 terabyte. So I don't buy 15 terabytes, I buy 5 terabytes. The applications think they have 15, and I don't have to keep going in there and reprovisioning. And so maximizing the efficiency of your storage can save you up to 80%. Greater agility. Our vision of the way storage should be is the ability to add incremental capacity in less than a minute, ability to scale without a forklift upgrade, the ability to add new nodes of storage and then dynamically load balance between those nodes with no manual intervention. And finally, guaranteed resiliency. Because at the end of the day, data is the lifeblood that keeps your organization flowing. And if you don't have access to the data when you need it, you could be out of business and you could be out of a job. And so that 5 nines uptime becomes very critical. And so if you take a look here in India, a recent example, a company called Adunik, they had a problem with their SAP environment. And what they were really looking for is ability to scale much more quickly as their SAP environment scaled with them without having to manually keep adding more storage and having to increase their OpEx to manage that environment. And so we were able to improve their operational efficiency by 40%. So essentially they were able to manage 40% more storage with no incremental resources, 20% reduction in delivery time due to user productivity enhancements, and at the end of the day, highly referenceable, very satisfied customer with Dell. And so as you keep thinking about this efficiency, agility, and resiliency, and then think about that across the continuum of your different storage needs, there's a broad variety of needs. You might have file-based systems for large data sets. You probably have block systems for high-performance database type applications. And you might have object data, either for long-term archiving or for things like medical records or bank records. You also want local recovery. You might want to be taking a local snapshot on your tier 1 storage every hour, every 30 minutes. I might have remote backup, and then eventually I might want to archive that. And as I go forward, maybe archive that in something like a cloud type of an environment. And so Dell's fluid data architecture is designed to meet those needs. And so in this slide, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about the capabilities that we have both today and the systems that we're shipping, but also as we go forward, where we see this evolving. As you make a decision to partner with somebody in storage, certainly you want the best of breed solution today. But the problem with high tech is that everybody's always leapfrogging. Somebody might have a feature today and somebody a different feature tomorrow. So you want to know that you're partnered with the right company that's going to have the right vision over the long term. So I'll talk a little bit about both of those. First of all, as I already mentioned, virtualized scale-out storage. All of the Dell storage now have automated tiering in the box. And essentially what that means is that the system is smart enough to know that if this piece of data hasn't been accessed in a day, a week, an hour, whatever policies you want to drive, we'll take it out of the higher performance, more costly drives and migrate it behind the scenes seamlessly to lower cost, lower tiers of storage. Other little things like the ability to write in RAID 10, which is highly efficient for writing, but then in the background migrate those over to RAID 50 sets, which are much denser and better for storage utilization and also much more efficient on writes. Things like thin provisioning, which I already described. And then finally, this whole concept of non-disruptive upgrades. If you look at the Dell Compellent solution, we have customers that 5-6 years ago bought a 1 gigabit per second fiber channel system, and today wanted to migrate over to IP SAN. So with Compellent being a modular system, we can take out that 1 gig module and replace that with 10 gig fiber channel. Had they wanted to migrate to FCOE, we could have done that, or 8 gig fiber channel. So you never have to throw away your old array and replace it. You can actually replace and upgrade in place. You can replace the old drives. If you want to move off of lower density 7.2K drives and upgrade to the latest and greatest, you can replace the drives. And as I mentioned before, you never rebuy the software. Once you own it, you never have to purchase it again. So that whole non-disruptive upgrade we think is pretty unique in the industry. But as I mentioned, you may want to start to archive to disk. And the ability to archive to object-based type of storage provides you highly scalable archiving, but also much faster recovery times and much more granular recovery points. And finally, backing up to disk. Right? So the ability to back up my data both from an incremental data backup standpoint, and in a much smaller time window is becoming increasingly important. As these data sets continue to grow and grow, I don't necessarily get more time in the day to back up that data. So the ability to do that much more quickly becomes even more critical. And then also scalable unified infrastructure. By unified, we mean the ability to support both file and block on the same array. Increasingly, as I mentioned, the storage growth is not in the database. Database structured data is predicted to grow anywhere at 8 to 10%. Unstructured data is doubling and tripling year on year as you see things as videos coming on board and photos and this merging of private and corporate data. And so the ability to manage both block and file in a single array we think is going to be critical. But as we go forward in the future, you want to optimize that not within a box, but across that entire platform. Right? So how do I have content-aware deduplication? Right? So rather than take one file and write it 3 and 4 and 5 times, write one copy of it and then just point to that. Or how do I compress a 10 gig file down to 3 gigabytes? And then only rehydrate when I actually access it. So I keep it in that compressed format as long as possible. Unified block and object management. So now the ability to manage that entire infrastructure from a single pane of glass. Right? So now I don't need multiple management tools, and the management tools aren't tied to a single solution. If you look at, we just announced our 12th generations of servers a couple of months ago, and one of the things we've done is we've increased the SSD actually in the server. And so now, not just think about storage as the external storage, but how do I actually start to leverage the server potentially as a storage device? So now I have the potential, if I choose to actually run entire databases natively right in the server and significantly reduce the amount of high-cost fiber channel drives I might need. And over time, the ability to integrate this directly into the cloud. I may not want to pay all the expense of a backup and a replication and manage that myself. It might just be easier to go do that in the cloud. And so as you think about these different tiers, cloud certainly should be one of those tiers and should be managed no differently than any of the other tiers that you have on your customer premise. So I won't talk about this in detail. I think some of the other speakers will talk about it a little bit more. But at a high level, there's a broad portfolio now from Dell based on Dell intellectual property that covers that whole wide range of different types of storage needs. We're also seeing an evolution in how people are consuming storage. For a lot of the larger customers in the room, you have complex environments that have a lot of legacy, and you need to preserve that legacy. You also have a lot larger IT shops or staff than most of the smaller businesses. So what most of those customers are looking for are best-of-breed solutions that they can integrate themselves into their existing infrastructure. For a lot of the, kind of the mid-market, they kind of have an idea of what they want, but they want help on best practices. They want help on integrating it. They want help on optimizing it for their particular business needs. And that's where they look for more custom solutions. And for the mid-market, and certainly the small, medium enterprise customers, they want more of a proven and pre-integrated solution, something that's already racked and stacked and cabled and provisioned and just basically ready to plug in. And so from Dell, we've got a variety of ways to engage. We can engage all the way on the far left around very custom, designed, and optimized specifically to your environment. So we have an entire team of infrastructure consulting specialists that do nothing but that day in and day out for customers. We can go from the design phase into the implementation and deployment phase and actually deploy this for you. We can provide ongoing management, data protection, and finally, support of that infrastructure. Now, the good thing from Dell is you can choose to engage on all of that or any pieces of it that make sense for your business. So a very flexible type of an engagement model. So it's not just Dell that's been talking about how great Dell is, and it's not just Dell customers, but also recently we've seen a lot of great press on Dell's capabilities. And if you look at the most recent Gartner Magic Quadrant from November of last year, Dell's actually put up in the upper right leader quadrant. So you've got the analysts now talking about Dell's as a leader in the industry. You've got the press, and certainly a lot of happy customers. So with that, just to kind of summarize, our perspective as a write storage architecture is what we say fluid by design. It constantly adapts to change without manual intervention. It allows you to free up your resources to go focus on business innovation and the things that make a difference, not managing the mundane. So with that, I thank you very much for spending the evening with us and look forward to talking to you more at the break. Thank you.